That woman nursed a stranger's baby. Throw her out. The words that destroyed Eliza Monroe's life came from her own father's mouth. In 1876, when a dying woman collapsed on her doorstep clutching a newborn, Eliza made a choice that would cost her everything. She took the child to her breast. Her family called it disgrace. The town called it madness, but one cowboy would call it exactly what he'd been searching for his entire life. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The spring rain fell in sheets that April morning, turning the dirt roads of Silverbrook into rivers of mud. Eliza Monroe stood at her bedroom window, watching the dawn break gray and cold over the Montana Territory, unaware that this would be the last sunrise she'd see from this room. She was 22 years old, with dark hair she kept pinned in a simple bun, and hands that knew the weight of hard work. Her mother had died 3 years prior, leaving Eliza to manage the household for her father, Samuel Monroe, and her 2 younger brothers. Samuel owned the largest dry goods store in town, and with it came a reputation he guarded more fiercely than his profits. Eliza heard the knock at the door while she was preparing breakfast. It was barely past 6, too early for customers, too early for neighbors. She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to answer it, her father's heavy footsteps already descending the stairs behind her. When she opened the door, the rain swept in with the wind, and with it, a sight that would change everything. A woman collapsed across the threshold. She was young, perhaps Eliza's age, but hollowed out by something terrible. Her dress was soaked through, her face the color of ash, and clutched against her chest, wrapped in a thin, wet blanket, was a baby. "Please," the woman gasped, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, my baby." Eliza dropped to her knees without thinking, her hands reaching for the woman even as her father's voice boomed from behind her. "Don't touch her! Eliza, get back!" But Eliza wasn't listening. She could see the woman's lips turning blue, could hear the awful rattle in her chest. The baby wasn't crying. That was worse than any sound. "We need to get her inside," Eliza said, her voice sharp with urgency. "She's dying." "Then let her die elsewhere." Samuel's face was red, his eyes hard. "I won't have this in my house. Look at her. She's probably diseased, probably a prostitute from one of those camps upriver." "She's a human being," Eliza shot back, already trying to lift the woman. "Help me!" For a moment, father and daughter locked eyes, a battle of wills that had been brewing for years finally breaking the surface. Samuel Monroe had ruled his household with absolute authority since his wife's death, and Eliza had bent to that authority, day after day, year after year, until now. "I said no." Samuel's voice dropped to something cold and final. "Close that door." The woman on the threshold made a sound, half moan, half sob. Her arms loosened around the bundle, and Eliza saw with horror that the baby was starting to slip. She caught the infant just as the woman's eyes rolled back. "No, no, no," Eliza whispered, cradling the child against her chest while trying to keep the woman's head from hitting the doorframe. The baby was so cold, so terribly still. "Please, someone help me." Her brothers appeared at the top of the stairs, their faces pale and frightened. James was 16, Thomas only 13. They looked to their father for direction. "Boys, go to your rooms," Samuel ordered. "Eliza, I'm telling you one last time, she's dead." The words fell into the space between them like stones into water. Eliza looked up at her father, rain streaming down her face, the baby clutched in her arms, and the woman's body going limp against the doorstep. "She's dead," Eliza repeated, her voice breaking. "And this baby will be too if we don't get her warm." Samuel Monroe stared at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked at the woman's body, at the growing pool of water and blood mixing on his clean floor, and his face hardened into something Eliza had never seen before, pure disgust. "Get her out of my doorway," he said quietly, "and get that thing out of my house." "That thing is a baby," Eliza's voice cracked. "A baby who just lost her mother." "Not our concern." Samuel turned away, his hands clasped behind his back in that way he had when a business matter was concluded. "Mrs. Henderson runs the orphanage. Take it there." "In this storm?" "It's 3 miles." "Then you'd better start walking." Eliza looked down at the infant in her arms. The baby was a girl, she could see now, with a tiny rosebud mouth and wisps of dark hair plastered to her skull. So small, so fragile. Her little chest was barely moving. Without planning it, without thinking about the consequences, Eliza made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She stood up, stepped over the dead woman's body, and walked past her father into the house. "What do you think you're doing?" Samuel's voice followed her up the stairs. "The baby is freezing," Eliza called back, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm going to warm her up, and then I'll take her to Mrs. Henderson." She heard her father's footsteps behind her but didn't stop. In her room, she kicked the door shut and locked it, something she'd never done before. Her hands were shaking as she unwrapped the wet blanket from the baby's body. The child was blue-tinged, her lips almost purple. She wasn't crying, wasn't making any sound at all, and that terrified Eliza more than anything. She grabbed a dry blanket from her bed and began rubbing the baby's limbs, trying to restore warmth, trying to bring some color back to that tiny face. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, sweetheart. Stay with me." The baby's eyelids fluttered, then her mouth opened, and she made a sound, small and weak, but a sound. Relief flooded through Eliza so powerfully she nearly sobbed. The baby was alive, cold and weak, but alive. There was pounding on the door now. "Eliza, open this door immediately!" Eliza ignored her father. She stripped off her own wet dress and wrapped herself in a robe, then tucked the baby against her skin, letting her body heat warm the child. It was something she had seen her mother do once with a premature lamb, and it had worked then. "Please work now," she prayed. "Please." The baby began to stir more, making small sounds of distress. Then those sounds turned to cries, weak but persistent. And with those cries came a realization that made Eliza's blood run cold. The baby was hungry. "Eliza Monroe, if you don't open this door right now, I'll break it down." Eliza looked at the door, then at the baby in her arms. The infant's cries were getting stronger, more desperate. She needed to eat, soon. The orphanage was 3 miles away, through a storm, with roads that were probably impassable by now. Even if Eliza left immediately, it would take her over an hour to walk there in good weather. In this rain, with a starving newborn, the baby wouldn't survive the journey. Eliza's heart was pounding. She knew what she was about to do, knew what it would mean. But looking down at that tiny, helpless face, she couldn't see any other choice. Her body had responded to her mother's death in an unexpected way. Grief had manifested physically, and for months after the funeral, she'd dealt with the discomfort of milk that had no purpose. It had finally stopped, but she knew from the midwife's daughter that sometimes, with the right stimulation, it could return. The baby's cries were growing frantic now, her tiny fists waving in the air. "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was apologizing to the baby, to her father, or to herself. "I'm so sorry." She brought the baby to her breast. At first, nothing happened. The baby rooted frantically but found nothing. Eliza bit her lip, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Maybe it wouldn't work. Maybe she'd condemn this child to starvation because she couldn't. Then she felt it. A tingling sensation followed by a familiar fullness. The baby latched on, and after a moment began to suckle. The relief was so profound that Eliza did sob then, quietly, tears streaming down her face as she held the nursing infant. Outside her door, her father had stopped pounding and was now speaking in a low, dangerous voice. "Eliza, I know what you're doing in there. Open this door, or so help me, you are no longer my daughter." Eliza's hands tightened around the baby. She thought about her mother, who had always chosen kindness when given the choice. She thought about all the years she'd spent being obedient, being dutiful, being exactly what Samuel Monroe wanted her to be. And she thought about the woman who had died on their doorstep, who had used her last strength to protect this child. "I can't," she called back, her voice breaking. "I can't let her die, Father." The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. It stretched out, heavy and final, until Eliza heard her father's footsteps retreating down the stairs. She stayed in her room for 2 hours, nursing the baby until she fell asleep, then holding her while the storm raged outside. The infant was warmer now, her color better, her breathing steady. She looked peaceful, unaware that her very existence had just shattered a family. When the knock came again, it was softer. James's voice, hesitant and scared. Lizzie? Father says, he says you need to come down. He's got the pastor here. Eliza's stomach dropped. The pastor. That meant her father was going to make this official, make it public. In a small town like Silverbrook, what the pastor knew, everyone would know by nightfall. She dressed carefully, putting on her Sunday dress even though it was Thursday. If she was going to face judgment, she'd face it with dignity. She wrapped the baby in her warmest blanket and tucked her into the crook of her arm. The baby's eyes were open now, dark gray, unfocused, but alert. She made small sounds, content and drowsy. "I won't let them hurt you," Eliza whispered to her. "I promise." Downstairs, the parlor had been transformed into a kind of courtroom. Samuel Monroe sat in his chair by the fireplace, his face carved from stone. Pastor Williams stood by the window, rain-splattered and uncomfortable. And in the doorway, as if guarding against escape, stood Deputy Collins. Eliza's mouth went dry. The deputy. Her father had brought the law into this. "Miss Monroe," Pastor Williams cleared his throat. "Your father has told me about the situation. I understand a woman died on your doorstep this morning." "Yes." Eliza's voice was steady despite her hammering heart. "I tried to save her, but she was already too far gone." "And the child?" The pastor's eyes went to the bundle in her arms. The baby needed care. She was freezing and starving. "So you—" Pastor Williams seemed unable to finish the sentence. Samuel Monroe had no such hesitation. "She nursed it, like some kind of animal. In my house?" Eliza flinched at the venom in his voice, but didn't look away from the pastor. "The baby would have died." "That wasn't your decision to make," Samuel said, standing now. "You're an unmarried woman, Eliza. What you've done, it's unnatural. It's sinful. It's merciful," Eliza interrupted, her voice rising. "It's what Mother would have done." "Don't you dare speak of your mother." Samuel's face was purple now. "Your mother was a decent, God-fearing woman who understood her place. You've brought shame on her memory, on this family, on Mr. Monroe." Pastor Williams held up a hand. "Please, let's discuss this calmly." But there was no calm in that room. Deputy Collins shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his belt. The baby stirred in Eliza's arms, making small sounds. "The question," Pastor Williams continued, "is what to do now. Miss Monroe, you understand that what you've done is highly irregular. An unmarried woman nursing a child, it raises questions, concerns." "What concerns?" Eliza demanded. "I saved a baby's life." "You exposed yourself," Samuel spat. "You acted like a whore." "Samuel!" Pastor Williams looked genuinely shocked. It's the truth." Samuel was shaking now, years of rigid control finally cracking. "She's ruined herself, ruined her reputation. No decent man will have her now. She's made herself unmarriageable. And for what? Some bastard child from a dead stranger?" Eliza felt something break inside her chest. Not her resolve, that remained firm as iron, but something else, some last thread of hope that her father might understand, might see the humanity in what she'd done. "Then I'm unmarriageable," she said quietly. "If caring for a helpless infant makes me unfit for marriage, then I accept that." "You accept—" Samuel's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You accept nothing. I accept. I accept that you are no longer my daughter. I accept that you cannot remain under this roof. I accept that you have made your choice." The room went very still. "Mr. Monroe," Pastor Williams said carefully, "perhaps we shouldn't be hasty." "I'm not being hasty. I've spent 2 hours thinking about this, praying about this, and the answer is clear." Samuel looked at Eliza, and his eyes were cold as January. "You can stay here and be part of this family, or you can keep that child, but you cannot do both." Eliza looked down at the baby in her arms. The infant was sleeping now, her tiny fingers curled against Eliza's chest, her breath coming in soft, even whispers. She was so small, so defenseless, so completely dependent on the woman who held her. "I choose her," Eliza whispered. "What was that?" Samuel leaned forward. "Speak up." Eliza lifted her chin, meeting her father's gaze. "I said I choose her. This baby didn't ask to be born. She didn't ask for her mother to die. She's innocent, and she deserves a chance at life. If you can't see that, if you'd rather cast out your own daughter than show mercy to a helpless child, then maybe I don't want to be part of this family anymore." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Samuel Monroe's face went very pale, then very red. "Then get out!" "Father!" James stepped forward from where he'd been standing in the hallway. "Please, you can't—" "Be silent," Samuel rounded on his son, "unless you want to join her in exile." James fell back, tears streaming down his young face. Thomas was crying too. Eliza could hear him from upstairs. "You have 1 hour," Samuel continued, turning back to Eliza. "Take whatever you can carry. After that, you're trespassing." "Mr. Monroe, surely there's another way." Pastor Williams tried again. "There is no other way." Samuel's voice was flat now, emptied of all emotion. "She's made her choice. She chooses shame over family, disgrace over duty. So be it. Let her live with that choice." Eliza stood frozen for a moment, the full weight of what was happening crashing down on her. She was being cast out, exiled from her own home, from her brothers, from everything she'd ever known, because she'd saved a baby's life. "Deputy Collins," Samuel said, "please ensure my daughter leaves the premises within the hour. If she's still here after that, I want her arrested for trespassing." The deputy looked miserable. "Mr. Monroe, I don't think—" "Do your job or I'll find someone who will." Eliza found her voice. "I don't need an hour." She turned and walked back upstairs, the baby still sleeping peacefully in her arms. In her room, she moved mechanically, her mind numb with shock. She had one bag, a carpet bag her mother had used for traveling. Into it she packed 2 changes of clothes, her mother's Bible, a hairbrush, the blanket the baby was wrapped in, and a small purse containing the money she'd saved from helping with mending and laundry, $3.47. Everything she owned in the world fit into a bag she could carry in one hand. She took one last look at her room, the room she'd slept in since childhood, where her mother had read to her, where she'd dreamed of the future. Then she walked out, closing the door behind her. Downstairs, her father had returned to his chair. He didn't look up as she descended the stairs. James was crying openly now, and Thomas had come down to stand beside him, his face blotchy and scared. "Lizzie," James choked out, "please don't go." Eliza paused at the bottom of the stairs. She wanted to go to them, to hug them, to promise that everything would be all right. But Samuel was watching, and she knew any display of affection would only make things harder. "Be good," she told her brothers, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Take care of each other." "Where will you go?" Thomas asked, his voice small. "I don't know." It was the honest truth. "But I'll be all right." She looked at her father one last time. Samuel Monroe met her gaze, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret? Doubt? But then it was gone, replaced by that iron hardness. "Goodbye, Father," Eliza said. He said nothing. Pastor Williams followed her to the door, his face creased with worry. "Miss Monroe, please, wait. Let me help you find somewhere to stay. Surely there's someone in town." "No." Eliza's voice was firm. "If my father has made his feelings known, the town will follow his lead. They always do." "But the baby will be fine." Eliza adjusted her grip on the sleeping infant. "We'll be fine." She stepped out into the rain, which had lessened to a steady drizzle. Behind her, she heard James crying, heard Thomas calling her name, but she didn't turn around. If she turned around, she might not be able to leave. And she had to leave. The mud sucked at her boots as she walked down the main street of Silverbrook. It was mid-morning now, and despite the rain, people were out. She saw Mrs. Henderson hanging laundry under her porch, saw Mr. Tucker opening his barber shop, saw the widow Cooper sweeping water off her front steps. They all saw her too. Saw her walking with a bag in one hand and a baby in her arms, rain soaking through her Sunday dress, her hair coming loose from its pins. They all turned away. Mrs. Henderson, who had known Eliza since birth, actually went inside and closed her door. Mr. Tucker suddenly found something fascinating to study in his shop window. The widow Cooper stopped sweeping and stared, her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Eliza kept walking. She passed the church, where she'd been baptized, where she'd sung in the choir, where she'd mourned her mother. She passed the schoolhouse, where she'd learned to read and write. She passed the general store, where her father conducted his business, his name painted in proud letters above the door. Samuel Monroe, Dry Goods. The baby woke as they reached the edge of town, her eyes opening wide, taking in the gray sky and the rain. She didn't cry, just looked around with that unfocused newborn gaze, as if trying to understand this strange world she'd been born into. "It's all right," Eliza whispered to her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We're going to be all right. I promise." But as Silverbrook disappeared behind them and the muddy road stretched out ahead, Eliza had no idea if that promise was one she could keep. She had $3 to her name, no shelter, no plan, and a baby who would need to eat again soon. The rain began to fall harder. Eliza pulled her shawl over the baby's head and kept walking, not knowing where she was going, only knowing she couldn't stop. To stop was to think, and to think was to feel the full weight of what she'd lost. So she walked. The road out of Silverbrook followed Miller's Creek for about 2 miles before branching off toward the farming communities that dotted the valley. Eliza had traveled this road before, in her father's wagon, going to visit neighbors or deliver goods. It had always seemed so short, so familiar. On foot, in the rain, with a baby in her arms, it seemed endless. Her boots were soaked through within the first mile. The carpetbag grew heavier with each step, the leather strap digging into her shoulder. The baby was getting restless, making small sounds that Eliza knew would soon turn to cries of hunger. She needed to find shelter, soon. About 3 miles out of town, she spotted it. An old cabin set back from the road, half hidden by a stand of cottonwood trees. Eliza had passed it 100 times before, but had never paid it much attention. It had been empty for years, ever since Old Man Jessup died, and nobody had wanted to buy land that far from town. But it had a roof and 4 walls, and right now that was more than Eliza had. She turned off the road and made her way through the overgrown grass toward the cabin. Up close, it was even more dilapidated than she'd remembered. The windows were broken, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and there were visible holes in the roof. But it was shelter. The door groaned in protest as she pushed it open. Inside the cabin was a single room, maybe 15 feet square. There was a rusted iron stove in one corner, a broken bed frame in another, and a thick layer of dust and debris over everything. Mice had clearly made themselves at home. She could see their droppings scattered across the floor. It was the most depressing place Eliza had ever seen, and it was hers. She set down her bag and looked around, trying to see past the decay to the possibilities. The stove might still work if she could clean it out. The bed frame was broken, but the wood could be useful. If she could patch the roof and board up the windows. The baby began to cry in earnest now, her tiny voice filling the empty cabin. First things first, Eliza thought. She settled down on the least dirty patch of floor, her back against the wall, and brought the baby to her breast. The infant latched on immediately, her cries stopping as she began to nurse. In the sudden quiet, Eliza could hear the rain drumming on the roof, water dripping through the holes to form puddles on the floor. She could hear the wind whistling through the broken windows. She could hear a mouse skittering somewhere in the walls. And for the first time since she'd opened the door that morning, she let herself cry. She cried for her mother, who would have been so ashamed to see her daughter in such circumstances. She cried for her brothers, who would grow up without her. She cried for her father, who had chosen pride over love. And she cried for herself, for the life she'd lost, for the future she'd imagined, for the innocence that had died along with the woman on her doorstep. But even as she cried, she held the baby close. And when her tears finally subsided, she looked down at the nursing infant and felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't the life she'd planned. This wasn't the future she'd dreamed of. But it was her life now, her future, her choice. "We're going to make this work," she whispered to the baby. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to survive this. You and me. Together." The baby's eyes drifted closed, milk-drunk and content. Her tiny hand rested against Eliza's chest, right over her heart. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the Montana territory, washing away the old life and making way for something new. Something Eliza Monroe couldn't yet imagine but would soon discover. In choosing compassion over obedience, in choosing love over approval, she had cast herself out of paradise. But sometimes, Eliza would learn, paradise isn't where you think it is. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. Sometimes you have to be broken before you can be remade. The baby sighed in her sleep, and Eliza held her closer, sheltering her from the cold, from the rain, from a world that had already shown itself to be harsh and unforgiving. But also, somewhere out there, beyond the rain and the ruins, a world that still held the possibility of kindness, of redemption, of a cowboy who would one day ride up to this broken-down cabin and see not disgrace, but exactly the kind of woman he'd been searching for his entire life. Though Eliza Monroe didn't know it yet, as she sat in that cold, empty cabin with a stranger's baby in her arms, her real story was only just beginning. The first night in this cabin was the longest of Eliza's life. She sat with her back against the wall, the baby sleeping fitfully in her arms, listening to every sound the darkness brought. The rain had stopped around midnight, but water continued to drip through the holes in the roof, each drop marking time like a slow, merciless clock. When dawn finally came, gray and reluctant, Eliza forced herself to stand. Her body ached from sitting in one position all night, and her dress was still damp from yesterday's rain. The baby stirred, making small, hungry sounds, and Eliza knew she had perhaps an hour before those sounds became screams. She laid the infant carefully on her folded shawl, the cleanest surface she could create, and took stock of her situation. The cabin looked even worse in daylight. Cobwebs hung like curtains in every corner, the floorboards were rotted through in places, and something had died behind the stove. She could smell it. But there was also potential. The walls were solid log, chinked with mud that had mostly held. The stove, despite its rust, still had its door and grate. And in the corner she'd missed last night, there was a rough wooden shelf that had somehow survived the years of neglect. Eliza had cleaned houses since she was 10 years old. She knew what hard work looked like. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By mid-morning, she'd swept out the worst of the debris, using a branch she'd broken off one of the cottonwoods as a makeshift broom. She'd cleared the dead animal from behind the stove, a raccoon, long desiccated, and scraped out the worst of the rust and old ash. The windows she couldn't fix, but she'd stuffed the broken panes with rags torn from her extra petticoat, blocking the worst of the drafts. The baby woke hungry, and Eliza sat down to nurse her, her arms trembling with exhaustion. As the infant fed, Eliza looked around at what she'd accomplished. It wasn't much. The cabin was still a ruin, but it was a slightly more livable ruin. She'd used the last of her energy and hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Her stomach cramped with hunger and her head felt light. $3 wouldn't last long, even if she could figure out where to spend it. Silver Brook was the nearest town, and she'd rather starve than go back there. "We need food," she told the baby softly. "And water. And wood for the stove. And about 100 other things I don't know how to get." The baby just blinked at her with those unfocused gray eyes, milk dribbling from the corner of her mouth. Eliza wiped the baby's face with her thumb, then looked toward the door. Miller's Creek ran past about a quarter-mile away. She could at least get water. As for food, she'd have to figure something out. She wrapped the baby securely in the blanket and made her way down to the creek. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones, and Eliza realized with dismay that she had nothing to carry it in. The carpet bag wasn't waterproof, and she had no bucket, no pot, no container of any kind. She stood there for a long moment, the baby in her arms, feeling the weight of her situation settle over her like a heavy coat. She couldn't even get water back to the cabin. How was she supposed to survive? The baby made a small sound, drawing Eliza's attention. The infant was looking up at her with an expression that seemed almost patient, as if to say, "You'll figure it out. You always do." Eliza knelt by the creek and drank her fill, then wet one of the rags and used it to wipe down the baby's face and hands. At least they wouldn't die of thirst immediately. She'd have to make regular trips to the creek, but it was manageable. One problem at a time, she told herself. One problem at a time. On the walk back to the cabin, she gathered dead wood from beneath the cottonwoods, balancing the pieces awkwardly while holding the baby. By the time she reached the cabin, her arms were full of kindling and her back was screaming, but she had enough to start a fire. If she could figure out how to light it. She had no matches, no flint, nothing. Eliza sat down on the cabin floor and very nearly gave up. It would be so easy to just sit here, to let the hunger and cold and exhaustion win. To admit that she'd been foolish, that her father had been right, that she couldn't survive out here alone. But then the baby made a sound, not crying, just a small coo, and Eliza looked down at her. The infant was awake, her tiny fingers waving in the air, her eyes trying to focus on Eliza's face. This baby trusted her, depended on her, needed her to be stronger than the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. Eliza took a shaky breath and stood up. There had to be a way. People had been making fire for thousands of years before matches. She'd seen her brothers do it once, rubbing sticks together, though they'd never actually gotten it to work. She spent the next 2 hours trying. Her hands blistered, her shoulders burned, and she accomplished nothing but a pile of wood shavings and a growing sense of hopelessness. When the sound of hoofbeats reached her ears, she was so exhausted she almost didn't react. Then she realized what it meant. Someone was coming, and panic flooded through her. Had her father sent someone to check on her, or worse, to drag her back? She grabbed the baby and retreated into the cabin, peering through one of the rag-stuffed windows. A single horse was approaching, picking its way carefully along the overgrown path. The rider was a man, tall in the saddle, wearing a dust-colored coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Not anyone from town that she recognized. The man reined in his horse about 20 yards from the cabin, and Eliza saw him take in the scene, the swept ground in front of the door, the pile of firewood, the wisps of smoke that definitely weren't coming from the stove. "Hello, the cabin," he called out. His voice was deep but not threatening. "I don't mean any harm. Just passing through and saw signs of life, wanted to make sure everything's all right." Eliza stayed silent, her heart pounding. The baby, sensing her tension, began to whimper. The man dismounted and took a few steps closer. "Ma'am, I heard a baby. Are you in some kind of trouble?" "Stay back," Eliza called out, trying to make her voice sound firm. "I have a gun." She didn't have a gun. She didn't have anything. The man stopped, his hands rising slightly from his sides. "All right, I'm staying right here. But ma'am, this cabin's been empty for 3 years. If you're squatting here, that's your business. But I need to know if you're all right. The Turner Ranch is about 2 miles north, and if there's trouble—" "There's no trouble," Eliza said. "Please, just go." The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but have you got a fire going? It's getting cold, and if you've got a baby—" Despite herself, Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. The kindness in his voice was almost worse than hostility would have been. She could handle judgment and contempt. She'd been handling it for 2 days now. But kindness threatened to break something inside her that she needed to keep intact. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the words. "Right." The man sounded unconvinced. "Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set down some supplies by your door, just some basics, nothing fancy, and then I'm going to ride on. You don't have to take them if you don't want to, but they'll be there if you need them." "I don't need charity," Eliza said, but even as she said it, her stomach cramped with hunger. Not charity, neighborly conduct. She heard him moving, heard the creak of leather as he unbuckled something from his saddle. "We look after each other out here. It's how things work." He set something down near the door, then backed away. "There's some dried meat, some hardtack, and a box of matches. Also a tin pot for water. Nothing you need to feel beholden for." Matches. Eliza closed her eyes. He'd brought matches. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." The man was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Ma'am, I don't know your story, and I don't need to. But I know what it looks like when someone's been dealt a hard hand. And I know what it looks like when someone's trying to survive despite that. The way I figure it, the world's got enough hardship without people adding to it when they don't have to." Eliza heard him mount his horse. "The Turner Ranch is 2 miles north on this road. You can't miss it. There's a sign by the gate. If you need work or help or just someone to talk to, you come find us. Ask for Caleb Turner. That's me." "Why would you offer work to someone you haven't even seen?" Eliza asked. She could hear the smile in his voice. "Because someone who's too proud to accept charity but too stubborn to quit is exactly the kind of person worth knowing. Take care of yourself, ma'am. And that baby." The hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving Eliza standing in the ruined cabin, the baby in her arms, and a stranger's kindness sitting on her doorstep like a question she didn't know how to answer. She waited a full 5 minutes before opening the door, half convinced the supplies would be gone, that she'd imagined the whole encounter. But they were there: a small canvas sack, a battered tin pot, and a box of matches. Eliza sank to her knees, the baby clutched to her chest, and sobbed with relief. The matches changed everything. Within an hour, she had a fire burning in the stove, weak and smoky, but real heat that pushed back the chill. She heated water in the tin pot, washing the baby properly for the first time since they'd left Silverbrook. The infant seemed to enjoy the warmth, cooing and waving her arms. "We're going to make it," Eliza told her, washing the tiny fingers with careful attention. "We're going to survive this." The dried meat and hardtack weren't much, but they were food. Eliza ate slowly, trying to make the supplies last, trying not to think about what would happen when they ran out. That night, with the fire burning and the baby fed and clean, Eliza allowed herself to think about the stranger, Caleb Turner. His voice had been kind, his actions generous, but more than that, he'd treated her with respect. He hadn't demanded to see her, hadn't insisted on knowing her story, hadn't made her feel like she owed him anything. In a world that had shown her nothing but judgment and contempt for 2 days, that simple dignity meant everything. But she couldn't go to the ranch. She couldn't accept more help. Couldn't risk becoming obligated. Couldn't bear the thought of seeing pity in anyone's eyes. She would survive on her own. She had to. The next 3 weeks tested that resolve to its limit. Eliza fell into a brutal routine. Wake with the dawn, nurse the baby, walk to the creek for water, scavenge for anything edible in the woods, tend the fire, nurse the baby again, try to make repairs to the cabin, collapse into exhausted sleep, wake when the baby cried in the night, repeat. The dried meat and hardtack from Caleb Turner lasted 5 days. After that, Eliza survived on what she could forage, wild greens that made her stomach cramp, berries that were probably too early in the season, roots she dug up with her bare hands because she had no tools. It wasn't enough. She could feel herself growing weaker, could see it in the way her dresses hung loose, in the trembling of her hands, in the dizzy spells that came without warning. But the baby was thriving. The baby was gaining weight, her cheeks filling out, her eyes growing more focused every day. That was what mattered. Eliza managed to patch 2 of the worst holes in the roof using bark and mud, a technique she remembered her father describing once. It didn't keep out all the rain, but it helped. She fashioned a crude bed from pine boughs, softer than the bare floor, but not by much. She learned which plants were edible and which made her violently ill, a lesson that cost her 2 miserable days. She saw other travelers on the road sometimes, heard their horses or wagons passing. She always hid when she heard them coming, retreating into the cabin or the woods, the baby clutched silent against her chest. She couldn't risk anyone from Silverbrook seeing her, couldn't risk word getting back to her father. And she definitely couldn't risk anyone seeing how desperate she was. On the 18th day, disaster struck. Eliza had gone to the creek as usual, the baby in her arms, the tin pot in her hand. She was kneeling to fill it when she heard voices, male voices, rough and loud, coming closer. She froze, her heart hammering. The voices belonged to 2 men, and they were arguing about something. Through the trees, she could see them now, rough-looking men on horseback, probably ranch hands heading back from town. "Told you we should have taken the main road," one was saying. "This way's shorter," the other replied. Then he saw her. Both men reined in their horses. Eliza stood slowly, the baby in one arm, the pot in the other, trying to look calm despite the fear flooding through her. "Well now," the first man said, a grin spreading across his face. "What do we have here?" "Just getting water," Eliza said, her voice steady. "I'll be on my way." "Hold on now." The second man dismounted. "You're that girl from Silverbrook, aren't you? Monroe's daughter. Heard about you." Eliza's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you heard." "Heard you got yourself in trouble." The man's eyes traveled over her, lingering on the baby. "Heard old Samuel threw you out for being loose." "That's not true," Eliza said, backing toward the cabin. "Please leave me alone." "Seems to me a girl living out here all alone might be grateful for some company," the first man said, dismounting now too. "Might be willing to show some appreciation for a little help." Eliza turned and ran. She heard them laugh behind her, heard their boots hitting the ground as they followed. She ran for the cabin, her lungs burning, the baby bouncing in her arms, water sloshing from the pot. She made it inside and slammed the door, but there was no lock, no bar, nothing to keep them out. She shoved the broken bed frame against it, knowing it wouldn't hold. "Come on now," one of the men called. "We're just being friendly." The door rattled. The bed frame scraped across the floor. Eliza backed into the corner, clutching the baby, her mind blank with terror. This was it. This was how it ended. She'd survived her father's rejection, survived 3 weeks of starvation and cold, only to— "What's going on here?" The voice cut through Eliza's panic like a knife. It was deep, commanding, and familiar. Through the rag-stuffed window, she saw a third horse, a big bay gelding, and a tall man dismounting with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. Caleb Turner. "This doesn't concern you, Turner," one of the men said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "That's where you're wrong." Caleb's voice was quiet, but something in it made Eliza shiver. "This cabin is on land adjacent to the Turner Ranch, which means anything that happens here concerns me very much. Now, step away from that door." "We were just talking to the lady." "The lady who ran away from you? The lady who barricaded herself in that cabin?" Caleb's voice hardened. "That kind of talking?" Silence. Then shuffling sounds. "Didn't realize she was under your protection," the first man muttered. "Well, now you do. I suggest you mount up and ride on, and I suggest you spread the word. Anyone who bothers this woman answers to me. Understood?" More shuffling, the sound of horses being mounted. "We didn't mean any harm," one of the men said. "Then you won't mind leaving, now." Eliza heard the horses ride away, heard them splashing through the creek, heard the sound fade into distance. But she didn't move. She stayed in the corner, the baby pressed against her chest, her whole body shaking. A soft knock at the door. "Ma'am, they're gone. You're safe now." Eliza couldn't respond. Her throat was closed up with fear and relief and shame. "I'm going to step away from the door," Caleb continued. "I'm going to be out here by that big cottonwood if you need anything. Take your time." She heard his footsteps retreat, heard the creak of leather as he sat down, probably leaning against the tree. It took Eliza a full 10 minutes to stop shaking. The baby had started crying, distressed by her mother's fear, and Eliza nursed her with trembling hands, whispering apologies and reassurances. When the infant finally fell asleep, Eliza carefully moved the bed frame away from the door and stepped outside. Caleb Turner was exactly where he'd said he'd be, sitting with his back against the cottonwood, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He looked up when she emerged, and Eliza got her first good look at him. He was younger than she'd expected from his voice. Maybe 30, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were blue, steady, and kind, and his face had the sort of honest openness that couldn't be faked. "Thank you," Eliza said, her voice hoarse, "for helping me." Caleb stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "No thanks needed. Those men shouldn't have bothered you." "They said—" Eliza's voice caught. "They said they'd heard about me, about why I left town." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Rumors travel fast out here. Most of them are lies, and the rest aren't anybody's business but yours." "You don't know what they're saying." "Don't need to know. What I do need to know is whether you're all right, whether you've got food, water, shelter that keeps out the rain." He paused. "And whether you'll accept help this time." Eliza looked down at the baby in her arms. The infant was sleeping peacefully, unaware of how close they'd come to disaster, unaware that they were living on the edge of catastrophe every single day. "I can't accept charity," Eliza said softly. "I won't be pitied." "Not offering pity," Caleb said, "offering work. The Turner Ranch needs help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, all the things that pile up when you've got 15 ranch hands and no women around to manage the household. It's honest work, honest pay. You'd earn your keep and then some." "Why would you offer that to me? You don't know anything about me." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I know you've been living in this ruin for 3 weeks with a baby to care for. I know you've patched the roof, kept the stove going, and somehow kept that child alive and healthy. I know you'd rather starve than ask for help. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Eliza felt tears welling up. "People in town say I'm disgraced, that I'm shameful." "People in town don't set the standards on my ranch," Caleb said firmly. "I do. And my standard is simple. You work hard, you're honest, and you treat people with respect. Everything else is between you and your own conscience." He paused. "Did you harm that baby?" "No." "Did you steal her from her rightful parents?" "Her mother died on my doorstep. There was no one else." "Then as far as I'm concerned, you saved a life. That's not shameful. That's admirable." Caleb picked up his hat and settled it back on his head. "The offer stands. You want work, you come to the ranch. We'll set you up in the bunkhouse. It's got a separate room that would be perfect for you and the little one. You'd have food, shelter, safety, and you'd earn every bit of it." "I don't understand why you're being kind to me," Eliza whispered. Caleb's expression softened. "My mother died when I was 12. My father raised me and my two sisters on his own, and it wasn't easy. People judged him for it, said a man couldn't raise daughters properly, said we'd all come to ruin. But there were a few folks who helped instead of judging, who offered work instead of criticism, who saw that my father was doing his best with a hard situation and decided to make it a little easier instead of harder." He met Eliza's eyes. "I remember what that kindness meant. I remember how it saved us. And I figure if I can pass that along, I should." Eliza was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I don't even know your name. I mean, I know it's Caleb Turner, but I don't know anything about you." "Well, we can fix that easy enough." Caleb smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. "I'm 32 years old, own the Turner Ranch with my father, though he's mostly retired now. I've got two sisters, both married and living in Denver. I like my coffee black, my horses fast, and my business straight. I don't drink much, don't gamble, and I work harder than any man I employ. That about cover it?" Despite everything, Eliza found herself smiling. "It's a start." "Good. Now how about you tell me your name? Seems only fair." "Eliza Monroe." "Well, Miss Monroe, I'm pleased to make your proper acquaintance." Caleb extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Eliza shook it. His grip was firm but gentle, calloused from years of ranch work. "And this little one?" Eliza looked down at the baby. "I don't know. Her mother didn't have time to tell me." "Well, she'll need a name eventually." "I know, it feels presumptuous. Like I'm claiming her when she's not mine to claim." "Seems to me she is yours," Caleb said quietly. "Maybe not by birth, but by choice. That counts for something." The baby stirred in Eliza's arms, her tiny mouth working in her sleep. Watching her, Eliza felt something settle inside her chest, a decision she hadn't realized she was making until it was already made. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." Caleb nodded, his eyes understanding. "That's a fine name, a strong name." He walked over to his horse and mounted up. "I meant what I said about the work, Miss Monroe. The offer stands whenever you're ready to accept it. No pressure, no judgment, just an open door if you need it." "Thank you," Eliza said. "Truly, thank you." Caleb touched the brim of his hat in farewell and rode off, heading north toward the ranch. Eliza watched him go, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt the first stirring of something she'd thought was lost forever. Not hope for herself, not yet, but possibility. The fragile beginning of a future that might include more than mere survival. She looked down at the baby. "What do you think, little Hope? Should we take a chance?" Hope slept on, trusting and content, and Eliza made her decision. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would walk to the Turner Ranch and see if Caleb Turner's kindness extended beyond words. But tonight, she would sleep in her patched cabin, with her fire burning and her baby safe, and she would remember that the world, while harsh and often cruel, still held people like Caleb Turner, people who chose kindness when they could just as easily choose indifference. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build on. The walk to the Turner Ranch the next morning took Eliza nearly 2 hours. She'd packed everything she owned back into the carpet bag, left the cabin as clean as she could make it, and set out just after dawn with Hope bundled against her chest. The morning was clear and cool, and with each step northward, Eliza felt her resolve waver between determination and terror. What if Caleb Turner had changed his mind? What if his offer had been nothing more than empty politeness? What if she arrived at the ranch only to be turned away, humiliated in front of strangers? But the memory of those two men at the creek, the fear in her own voice as she'd barricaded the door, kept her feet moving forward. She couldn't go back to that cabin. She couldn't survive another 3 weeks of isolation and starvation, not with winter approaching, not with a baby depending on her. The Turner Ranch sign appeared exactly where Caleb had said it would be, a weathered wooden board hanging from a crossbeam between two posts. Beyond it, a well-maintained road led to a sprawling collection of buildings, barns, and corrals spread across a gentle valley. Cattle dotted the distant hills, and Eliza could see men working near the barns, their voices carrying faintly on the morning air. It was the most prosperous-looking place Eliza had seen since leaving Silverbrook, and the contrast to her ruined cabin made her acutely aware of how she must look: dirty dress, wild hair, gaunt face, and a baby who wasn't hers cradled in arms that trembled with exhaustion. She almost turned back, almost convinced herself it was too much to ask, too presumptuous to appear on their doorstep, expecting charity disguised as work. Then Hope made a small sound, and Eliza looked down into those gray eyes that had learned to focus on her face, to recognize her, to trust her completely. For Hope, she could be brave. She walked through the gate. A man spotted her first, a grizzled ranch hand mending fence near the road. He straightened up, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her, then called out toward the main house. "Mr. Turner, you got a visitor!" Within moments, Caleb emerged from the barn, and the relief that flooded through Eliza at the sight of him nearly buckled her knees. He saw her, and his expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been pleasure, though he schooled it quickly into professional courtesy. "Miss Monroe," he said, walking toward her with that easy, confident stride. "You came." "You said the offer stood," Eliza replied, hating how uncertain her voice sounded. "If it doesn't, if you've reconsidered, I understand." "I haven't reconsidered." Caleb stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes taking in her condition with a quick, assessing glance. "I'm glad you're here. Come on, let me show you around." He led her toward the main house, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch and curtained windows. Along the way, ranch hands stopped their work to stare, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Eliza felt their eyes on her like weights, felt the judgment in their silence. "Don't mind them," Caleb said quietly. "They're not used to seeing women around here. We haven't had proper household help since my mother passed." "How long ago was that?" 6 years now." Caleb's voice softened. "This place has needed a woman's touch for a long time. We've been managing, but managing isn't the same as thriving." He showed her the kitchen first, a large room dominated by a cast-iron stove that made her ruined cabin stove look like a toy. There were proper pots and pans hanging from hooks, a pump for water right inside the house, and a pantry stocked with more food than Eliza had seen in a month. "Meals are twice a day," Caleb explained. "Breakfast at dawn, dinner at sunset. The men make do with whatever they can scrounge for midday, but we've been talking about adding a proper lunch service. The cooking's been rotating between whoever draws the short straw, and I'll be honest with you, most of these boys can't cook worth a damn." Despite her nervousness, Eliza smiled. "I can cook." "That's what I'm counting on." Caleb opened a door off the kitchen, revealing a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the vegetable garden. "This would be yours. It's not much, but it's private, warm, and the roof doesn't leak." Eliza stepped into the room, and something inside her chest loosened. It was simple, spare even, but it was clean and dry and safe. After 3 weeks in the cabin, it looked like a palace. "The work isn't easy," Caleb continued. 3 meals a day for 15 men, plus laundry, cleaning, mending. It's full days 6 days a week. Sundays you'd have off. Pay is $15 a month, plus room and board." $15. Eliza's mind reeled. That was more money than she'd ever had at one time in her life. "I'll need help with Hope sometimes," she said, her voice catching on the baby's name. "When I'm cooking or washing, I can't leave her alone." "We'll work something out." Caleb glanced at the sleeping infant. "How old is she now?" "About a month, I think. It's hard to know exactly." Caleb nodded, then met Eliza's eyes. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Eliza's heart sank. Here it came. The question she'd been dreading, the judgment disguised as concern. "Did you steal that baby?" "No." The word came out fierce and immediate. Her mother died on my doorstep. There was no one else to care for her. And your family threw you out for helping. It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. My father gave me a choice. The baby or my home. I chose her. Caleb was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, That took courage. It took stubbornness, Eliza corrected. I don't know if it was courage or just foolishness. Sometimes they're the same thing. Caleb extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Miss Monroe? You'll work for the ranch, earn your keep, and build yourself a future? Eliza looked at his hand, then at the room behind her, then down at Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. Every instinct she had screamed that this was too good to be true, that there had to be a catch, that men didn't offer women jobs and safety without expecting something in return. But when she looked into Caleb Turner's eyes, she saw only honest intention and patient kindness. She shifted Hope to one arm and shook his hand. We have an agreement. The first 2 weeks at the Turner Ranch passed in a blur of exhausting, satisfying work. Eliza rose before dawn to start breakfast, spent her days cooking and cleaning and learning the rhythms of ranch life, and fell into bed each night so tired she barely remembered lying down. Hope slept in a wooden crate lined with blankets next to Eliza's bed. And during the day, one of the older ranch hands, a man named Pete, who'd raised 6 children of his own, would watch her when Eliza needed both hands free. The men were wary of her at first, uncertain how to act around a woman who'd appeared from nowhere with a baby and a mysterious past. But Eliza's cooking won them over quickly. She made real biscuits, beef stew that didn't taste like leather, and apple pie from the fruit in the ranch's small orchard. Within a week, the dinner table had gone from a quiet, functional affair to something approaching civilized, with the men actually washing their hands first and saying thank you when she served them. Caleb kept his distance, professional and courteous but never familiar. He ate with the men, thanked her for the meals, and left her to her work. But sometimes Eliza would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something thoughtful and careful, as if he were working out a puzzle in his mind. It was on a Saturday evening, 2 weeks after her arrival, that everything changed. The ranch was hosting a gathering, something Caleb had mentioned casually a few days earlier, but that Eliza hadn't fully understood the scope of until the day itself arrived. Apparently, it was a quarterly tradition, a chance for neighboring ranchers and their families to come together, share news, trade horses, and strengthen the community bonds that were essential to survival in the territory. You don't have to attend if you're not comfortable, Caleb had told her that morning. You can stay in your room, and no one will think less of you. But Eliza had spent 3 weeks hiding from the world, and she found she was tired of it. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd saved a baby's life. If people wanted to judge her for that, let them judge her to her face. So she put on her least worn dress, pinned her hair up properly for the first time in weeks, and emerged from her room with Hope in her arms as the first wagons began arriving. The gathering took place in the large open area between the house and the main barn, where tables had been set up and lanterns hung from posts to light the evening. Eliza had spent the day preparing food: roasted chickens, potato salad, cornbread, 3 different pies. And now she stood near the serving tables, Hope sleeping against her shoulder, and watched the crowd arrive. There were more people than she'd expected, maybe 40 or 50, ranging from weathered ranchers to young families with children. The women clustered together, their dresses fine by frontier standards, their hair elaborately styled. The men gathered near the barn, passing around a jug of something that definitely wasn't water. And then Eliza saw a familiar face in the crowd, and her blood turned to ice. Mrs. Henderson from Silverbrook, the woman who'd shut her door in Eliza's face the day she left town. She was talking to another woman, gesturing animatedly, and then her eyes landed on Eliza. The recognition was instant and hostile. Mrs. Henderson said something to her companion, and both women turned to stare. Then Mrs. Henderson started making her way through the crowd, her face set in lines of righteous disapproval. Eliza's first instinct was to flee, to retreat to her room and hide like Caleb had suggested, but she'd made a promise to herself to stop hiding, and she intended to keep it. She stood her ground. "Eliza Monroe," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carrying across the gathering. "I never thought I'd see you showing your face in polite society again." The crowd went quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence, Every eye turned toward Eliza and the older woman facing her down. "Mrs. Henderson," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady, "I didn't know you'd be here. Obviously, or you wouldn't have dared attend." Mrs. Henderson's eyes went to Hope, and her lip curled. "And you brought that creature with you. Have you no shame?" "That creature is a baby," Eliza said, her voice hardening. "Her name is Hope, and she's done nothing to deserve your contempt." "She's a bastard child that you had no right to keep," Mrs. Henderson snapped. "Your father told everyone what you did, how you disgraced yourself, nursing a stranger's baby like some kind of what?" The voice cut through Mrs. Henderson's tirade like a whip crack. Caleb had appeared from somewhere in the crowd, and he was furious. Eliza had never seen him angry before, but she saw it now in the set of his jaw, the ice in his eyes, the absolute stillness of his posture. "Mr. Turner," Mrs. Henderson began, "surely you can't approve of this woman working on your ranch." "What I approve of is none of your concern, Mrs. Henderson." Caleb's voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the gathering. "Miss Monroe works for the Turner Ranch. She's under my protection and my employment, and I won't have her insulted on my property." "But her father cast out his own daughter for showing mercy to a dying woman and her child." Caleb stepped closer to Mrs. Henderson, and the woman actually took a step back. "Her father chose pride over family, judgment over compassion. And if you ask me, that says a hell of a lot more about Samuel Monroe's character than it does about his daughter's." The crowd was completely silent now. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat, could feel hope stirring against her shoulder. "Miss Monroe saved a baby's life," Caleb continued, his voice ringing clear. "She gave up everything she had, her home, her family, her reputation, to keep an innocent child from dying. Where I come from, that's not disgraceful, that's heroic." Mrs. Henderson's face had gone red. The talk in town is gossip and speculation from people who have nothing better to do than tear down a woman who showed more courage in one moment than most of them will show in their entire lives." Caleb looked around at the gathered crowd, making eye contact with several of the ranchers. "I know most of you here. I know you're good people who understand the difference between scandal and slander. And I'm asking you now to judge Miss Monroe not by rumors, but by her actions, by her character, by the choice she made to save a life when it would have been easier to let that baby die." A murmur ran through the crowd. Eliza saw some people nodding, saw others whispering to their neighbors. The mood was shifting, uncertainty replacing certainty. "Furthermore," Caleb said, and his voice took on a different quality, something that made Eliza's breath catch. "I want you all to know that I've asked Miss Monroe to be my wife." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Eliza stared at Caleb, certain she'd misheard, but he was looking right at her, his eyes steady and sure, and she knew she hadn't imagined it. "You what?" Mrs. Henderson gasped. "I've asked her to marry me," Caleb repeated, still looking at Eliza. "She hasn't given me an answer yet, but I'm hoping she'll say yes, because she's exactly the kind of woman I want to build a life with. Strong, compassionate, willing to sacrifice everything for what's right. That's worth more than all the pristine reputations in Montana." The crowd erupted. Some people were cheering, others looked scandalized, still others seemed simply stunned. Mrs. Henderson opened and closed her mouth like a landed fish, unable to form words. But Eliza barely noticed any of it. She was looking at Caleb, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to process the enormity of what he'd just done. He'd claimed her in front of everyone. He'd defended her honor, elevated her status, and shielded her from judgment in the most public way possible. And he'd done it by lying. Or had he? The gathering dissolved into chaos after that. Some people came forward to congratulate Caleb, others pulled Eliza aside to offer tentative best wishes, still others left in a huff of disapproval. Mrs. Henderson departed with her companion, her face tight with fury, no doubt already planning how to spread this new scandal back in Silverbrook. Through it all, Eliza moved as if in a dream, accepting congratulations she didn't deserve for an engagement that didn't exist, smiling and nodding while her mind raced. It was nearly midnight before the last guest left. The ranch hands cleaned up the tables and lanterns, shooting curious glances at Eliza as they worked. Finally, when the last wagon had disappeared down the road and the last ranch hand had retired to the bunkhouse, Eliza found herself alone with Caleb in the quiet darkness between the house and barn. Hope was sleeping in her arms, exhausted from being passed around and cooed over all evening. Eliza held her close, trying to find the words for what she needed to say. Caleb spoke first. "I apologize." Eliza looked up sharply. "For what?" "For putting you in that position. For making that announcement without asking you first." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "I saw Mrs. Henderson attacking you, and I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let her destroy you in front of all those people. So I said the first thing I thought would stop her. You said you wanted to marry me. I know. And I understand if you're angry, if you feel I've compromised you or forced you into something you don't want. I can retract it tomorrow. Tell everyone I spoke in haste. Did you mean it?" The question hung between them. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the house. "I don't know," he said finally, and his honesty was somehow more compelling than any romantic declaration could have been. "I know I respect you. I know I admire your strength and your compassion. I know that watching you with hope, seeing how you've rebuilt your life from nothing, has shown me more about true character than a lifetime of polite society ever could." He stepped closer, close enough that Eliza could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I know that the idea of you being my wife doesn't displease me. That having you here these past weeks has made this ranch feel more like a home than it has in years. That Hope's laughter in the morning is something I look forward to hearing." He paused. "But I also know that you deserve more than a marriage of convenience born from my need to protect you from gossip. You deserve to be courted properly, to have time to decide what you want, to choose your own future." Eliza felt tears welling up, though whether they were from relief or disappointment or simple exhaustion, she couldn't say. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now, you go to bed and get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do about tonight's announcement. If you want to accept it, if you want to court properly and see where this might lead, we can do that. If you want me to retract it and preserve your employment here without any romantic expectations, we can do that too. Whatever you decide, I'll support it." "Why?" Eliza asked. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Caleb smiled, soft and sad. "Because someone should be. Because you deserve kindness. Because that baby in your arms deserves to grow up knowing that the world has good people in it, not just cruel ones." He settled his hat back on his head. "Get some sleep, Miss Monroe. We'll talk more in the morning." He turned to walk toward his own quarters in the main house, but Eliza's voice stopped him. "Caleb?" He turned back. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did tonight, for standing up for me. Even if it was a lie, even if it complicated everything, thank you for showing me that someone still sees me as worth defending." "It wasn't entirely a lie," Caleb said quietly. "The part about you being exactly the kind of woman I'd want to build a life with. That was true." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Eliza." "Good night." Eliza watched him walk away, then looked down at Hope, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos of the evening. The baby's face was relaxed, trusting, completely unaware that her entire future had just shifted on its axis. "What do you think?" Eliza whispered to her. "Should we take a chance on him?" Hope, of course, didn't answer, but as Eliza carried her inside to their small, safe room, she found herself thinking about Caleb's words, about his honesty, about the way he'd stepped in front of Mrs. Henderson's venom without hesitation. She thought about how he'd never once asked her for anything inappropriate, never leveraged his position or her dependence on him, never made her feel anything but respected and valued. And she thought about how, for the first time since her mother died, she'd felt truly defended, truly protected. Not because she was weak, but because someone had decided she was worth fighting for. In her room, she laid Hope in her crate and changed into her nightdress. Through the window, she could see the stars scattered across the Montana sky, brilliant and countless and infinite in their possibilities. Tomorrow she would have to decide what to do about Caleb's announcement. Tomorrow she would have to figure out how to navigate the changed dynamics of their relationship, how to separate gratitude from genuine feeling, how to protect both her heart and Hope's future. But tonight, for the first time in over a month, Eliza Monroe allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than just survival. A future that might hold partnership and respect and maybe, eventually, something deeper. She climbed into bed and closed her eyes, and for the first time since leaving Silverbrook, she slept dreamlessly, peacefully, without fear. Outside her window, in his own room in the main house, Caleb Turner lay awake and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the smartest decision he'd ever make. He thought about Eliza's face when he'd made his announcement, the shock and confusion and something else, something that might have been hope. He thought about the way she'd stood her ground against Mrs. Henderson, refusing to be cowed, protecting hope with every fiber of her being. And he thought about how, when he'd said those words, "She's exactly the kind of woman I want to build a life with," he'd realized with startling clarity that he'd meant every single word. Tomorrow would bring complications. Tomorrow would require difficult conversations and careful decisions. Tomorrow would test whether what had started as protection could become something real. But for tonight, both Caleb and Eliza allowed themselves to wonder, to hope, to imagine that maybe, just maybe, something beautiful could grow from the ruins of Eliza's shattered life. And in her crate by the bed, little hope slept on, the bridge between two people who'd been searching for family in all the wrong places, only to find it in the most unexpected way possible. The gathering had ended. The confrontation was over. But the real story, the story of how a cast-out woman and a lonely rancher would build a family from compassion and choice, was only just beginning. Morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Eliza woke to Hope's soft cries just as the first gray light began filtering through her window, and for a moment she simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the previous night's events in her mind. Caleb had announced their engagement in front of 40 people. He'd defended her honor, elevated her status, and fundamentally changed the nature of their relationship with a handful of words spoken in anger and protection. And then he'd told her it was her choice whether to make it real or retract it. Eliza sat up and lifted Hope from her crate, bringing the baby to her breast. As Hope nursed, Eliza tried to organize her thoughts into something coherent. The problem was that her feelings were a tangled mess of gratitude, confusion, attraction, and fear. How could she possibly separate what she felt for Caleb from what she owed him? How could she know if what stirred in her chest when she looked at him was genuine affection or simply the desperate gratitude of someone who'd been drowning and found a lifeline? A soft knock at her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Monroe?" Caleb's voice was cautious. "I've got coffee on if you'd like some. No pressure to talk if you're not ready, but I thought you might want breakfast before the men wake up." Eliza's heart did something complicated in her chest. Even now, even after everything, he was giving her space, offering kindness without expectation. "Give me 10 minutes, she called back. She dressed quickly, settled Hope in the crate with a makeshift toy, a wooden spoon wrapped in cloth, and made her way to the kitchen. Caleb was standing by the stove, 2 cups of coffee already poured, and he turned when she entered with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and apprehensive. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." Eliza accepted the coffee he offered, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching out like taffy. "I've been thinking," they both said simultaneously, then stopped. Caleb gestured for her to continue. "Ladies first." Eliza took a breath, trying to gather her scattered thoughts into something resembling coherence. "What you did last night, standing up for me, making that announcement, it was the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me. And I need you to know how much that means, how much it changes things." "But," Caleb prompted gently, "but I don't know if I can trust my own feelings right now." The words came out in a rush. "You saved me, Caleb. You gave me work when I was starving, shelter when I had nowhere to go, protection when I was vulnerable. How can I possibly know if what I feel for you is real or just gratitude? Dependence?" Caleb set down his coffee cup and leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "That's a fair question, and it's one I've been asking myself, too." Eliza looked up sharply. "You have?" "Of course." Caleb's smile was rueful. "You think I haven't noticed how complicated this is? I'm your employer, Eliza. I have power over you, your job, your housing, your security. Even if I never intended it, even if I'd never abuse it, that power imbalance exists. So how do I know if you'd feel obligated to accept my suit out of fear of losing your position? How do I know I'm not taking advantage of your circumstances? The honesty in his voice made Eliza's chest ache. Most men wouldn't even think about such things, let alone speak them aloud. So what do we do? She asked quietly. Caleb was silent for a moment, staring into his coffee as if it held answers. When he looked up, his eyes were clear and determined. We take our time, he said. We don't rush into anything. Last night's announcement bought you protection from gossip and judgment, and that stands regardless of what happens between us. As far as the world is concerned, we're courting. But what happens in private, how we actually feel, what we actually want, that's between you and me. And if I decide I don't want to marry you, Eliza asked, needing to know. What happens then? Then we'll wait a respectable amount of time, announce that we've decided we don't suit, and you'll continue working here as my employee with no change to your position or pay. Caleb's voice was firm. I meant what I said, Eliza. Your job here doesn't depend on becoming my wife. It depends on your work, which has been excellent. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of anxiety she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. You really mean that? I really mean that. Caleb moved closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. But I also want you to know that my offer last night wasn't entirely strategy. The part about you being the kind of woman I'd want to build a life with. That was true. I respect you, Eliza. I admire your strength. And I enjoy your company. So while I'm not going to pressure you, I am going to court you properly, if you'll allow it. Court me how? Eliza asked, genuinely curious. Well, for starters, I'd like to take you and Hope on a picnic this Sunday. There's a spot by the north pasture with a view of the mountains that's particularly pretty this time of year. We could pack a lunch, spend the afternoon talking, getting to know each other better. He paused. As people, not just as employer and employee. The image he painted was so normal, so wholesome, so utterly unlike the dramatic chaos of the past month that Eliza found herself smiling despite her anxiety. I'd like that, she said softly. I think Hope would too. She's never been on a picnic. Then it's settled. Caleb's smile transformed his entire face, and Eliza felt her heart do that complicated thing again. Sunday afternoon, weather permitting. In the meantime, how about we make breakfast before the men wake up and wonder why we're both up so early? They worked side by side in comfortable silence, Caleb frying eggs while Eliza made biscuits, and it felt natural in a way that surprised her. There was an ease between them that hadn't been there before, as if last night's confrontation and this morning's conversation had cleared the air somehow. The ranch hands filed in for breakfast with their usual mixture of gratitude and appetite, and if they noticed anything different between Eliza and Caleb, they were wise enough not to mention it. Pete, the older hand who'd been helping with Hope, caught Eliza's eye and gave her a small nod of approval that made her want to cry. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Word of the engagement had spread like wildfire, and Eliza found herself the subject of both approval and censure depending on who was talking. Some of the neighboring ranch wives began stopping by with small gifts, a blanket for Hope, a jar of preserves, a packet of flower seeds for the garden. Others made a point of avoiding the Turner Ranch entirely, their disapproval evident in their absence. Mrs. Henderson, true to form, had apparently spent the days since the gathering telling anyone who would listen that Caleb Turner had been bewitched by a shameless woman who'd used a baby to trap him into marriage. The story had reached the ranch through one of the hands who'd been in town for supplies, and he'd repeated it to the others in hushed, scandalized tones. Caleb's response, when he heard about it, was to laugh. Let her talk, he said, helping Eliza hang laundry on the line behind the house. People who know me know better, and people who don't know me aren't worth worrying about. Doesn't it bother you, Eliza asked, pinning up one of his shirts, having your name attached to scandal? My name's been attached to worse. Caleb handed her another shirt. When my mother died and my father kept my sisters here instead of sending them to relatives back east, people said he was unfit, said he was ruining their prospects, said no decent man would marry girls raised on a ranch without a mother's influence. Turned out they were wrong. Both my sisters found good men who loved them exactly as they were. The gossips moved on to someone else, the way they always do. What if they're right this time? Eliza's voice was small. What if I am ruining your prospects? You could have any woman in the territory. I don't want any woman in the territory. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. I want someone who understands what it means to choose principle over comfort, someone who knows the value of hard work, someone who makes this ranch feel like a home. He paused. Someone like you. Eliza looked at him over the laundry line, this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to form, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not gratitude this time, or dependence, but something warmer and more dangerous. Caleb, she started, but he shook his head. Don't say anything yet. Wait until Sunday. Wait until we've had time to talk properly, away from the ranch and the work and all the eyes watching us. He smiled. Give yourself permission to figure out what you actually feel without rushing into anything. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, warm sun, a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers and pine. Caleb packed a basket with cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and a jar of the peach preserves one of the neighbor women had brought by. Eliza dressed Hope in a fresh gown she'd sewn from fabric Pete had given her, and they set out on horseback for the north pasture, Eliza riding behind Caleb with Hope secure in a sling against her chest. The spot Caleb had mentioned was everything he'd promised and more. A small meadow nestled against the foothills, surrounded by aspens that whispered in the breeze, with a view of the mountains that took Eliza's breath away. Caleb spread out a blanket while Eliza settled Hope on a soft patch of grass, and for a moment they just sat there, taking in the beauty of the landscape. My mother used to bring me here, Caleb said quietly. When I was upset or confused or just needed to think. She said the mountains put things in perspective, reminded you that your problems were small compared to the vastness of the world. She sounds like she was wise, Eliza said. She was. Caleb's voice was thick with old grief. Losing her nearly destroyed my father. He loved her so much that after she died, he could barely function for months. My sisters and I had to run the ranch ourselves, and we were just kids. He paused. I used to think that kind of love was dangerous, that giving someone that much power over your happiness was foolish. And now? Eliza asked softly. Now I think maybe it was worth it. For him, I mean. Those years he had with her, the family they built, the life they shared. He wouldn't trade that for anything, even knowing how it would end. Caleb looked at her. He told me once that the worst day with her was better than the best day without her. That even the grief was worth it because it meant he'd had something worth grieving. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. That's beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Love usually is, I think. Caleb reached out and took her hand, his touch careful, asking permission. Which is why I need to be honest with you about something. Eliza's heart began to pound. What? When I made that announcement at the gathering, I told myself it was just strategy, just a way to protect you from Mrs. Henderson and the gossip. Caleb's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. But that wasn't entirely true. The truth is, I've been thinking about asking you to court me for real for over a week now. I just didn't know how to do it without making you feel obligated or pressured. Caleb, let me finish. His eyes were intense, earnest. I know the circumstances aren't ideal. I know we've only known each other a few weeks. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is complicated and difficult and probably foolish. But Eliza, when I see you with Hope, when I watch you work, when I hear you laugh at something Pete said, or see you standing up to men twice your size with nothing but courage and conviction, I don't just respect you, I'm falling for you. The words hung in the mountain air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. I'm scared, Eliza whispered. I'm scared that I don't know my own heart. I'm scared that what I feel is just gratitude or relief or desperation. I'm scared of making a mistake that will hurt both of us. I'm scared too, Caleb admitted. I'm scared of taking advantage of your circumstances. I'm scared of rushing into something we'll both regret. I'm scared that you'll say yes because you feel like you have to, not because you want to. They sat in silence for a moment, hands still intertwined, both afraid and hopeful in equal measure. Then Hope made a sound, a coo of pure contentment, and they both looked down at her. The baby was lying on the blanket, her eyes tracking the movement of leaves overhead, completely at peace. She trusts you, Caleb said quietly. Completely and absolutely. She knows you'll keep her safe. I promised her I would, Eliza replied. The day we left Silverbrook, I promised her we'd survive. And you have. You've done more than survive. You've built a life for her, given her safety and security and love. Caleb squeezed her hand. That's what I want to offer you, Eliza. Not rescue, not charity, but partnership. A chance to build something together. You and me and Hope, making a family out of choice instead of obligation. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past her own fears and uncertainties. She saw a man who'd shown her nothing but kindness and respect. A man who'd defended her when he didn't have to, who'd given her work instead of pity, who'd stood up to an entire gathering of people rather than let her be humiliated. But more than that, she saw a man who was being honest about his own vulnerabilities, his own fears, his own uncertainty. He wasn't pretending to have all the answers or trying to sweep her off her feet with grand gestures. He was simply offering himself, flawed and uncertain and human, and asking if she might consider building something real with him. I don't know if what I feel is love, Eliza said slowly. Not yet, but I know that when I see you, my heart feels lighter. I know that your kindness hasn't just been surface-level politeness, but something deeper and more genuine. I know that you've treated Hope like she matters, like she's worth protecting, even though she's not your responsibility. She is my responsibility, Caleb corrected gently. If we do this, if we make this real, she becomes my daughter in every way that matters. I want you to know that going in. This isn't just about you and me. It's about the three of us. A ready-made family. Eliza felt tears streaming down her face now, though she couldn't say exactly why. Relief, maybe, or hope, or the overwhelming realization that Caleb wasn't just offering her marriage. He was offering to choose Hope, to claim her, to give this cast-off baby a father and a name and a future. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would you do that? Take on a stranger's child as your own? Because she's not a stranger's child anymore, Caleb said simply. She's yours. And if you're mine, then she's mine too. That's how family works. You choose each other, and then you fight like hell to protect that choice. The mountain stood silent witness as Eliza made her decision, not out of fear or gratitude or desperation, but out of a growing certainty that this man, this honest, kind, complicated man, was offering her something real, something worth the risk. I can't promise to love you yet, she said. I need time for that. Time to know my own heart, to understand what I feel without the desperation clouding everything. I'm not asking for promises, Caleb said. I'm asking for a chance. Then yes. Eliza's voice was steady now, clear and sure. Yes, I'll court you properly. I'll give us time to see if this could be real. And if it is, if we find that what we feel is genuine and lasting, then yes, I'll marry you. Caleb's smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and full of promise. That's all I'm asking for. Just a chance. He leaned forward, slow and careful, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Eliza didn't pull away. She met him halfway, and their first kiss was soft and sweet and tasted like hope. Hope herself chose that moment to start fussing, and they broke apart laughing, the spell broken but not destroyed. Eliza picked up the baby, settling her for nursing, and Caleb unpacked the picnic basket with the kind of domestic ease that made Eliza's heart ache. They spent the afternoon talking, really talking, sharing stories from their childhoods, their dreams for the future, their fears and hopes and secret wishes. Caleb told her about his sisters, about learning to run a ranch at 16, about the loneliness of the past few years. Eliza told him about her mother, about the suffocating propriety of her father's house, about the moment she'd chosen hope over everything she'd ever known. And slowly, gradually, Eliza felt something growing between them. Not the desperate gratitude of the drowning, but something more solid and real. Trust, understanding, the beginning of genuine affection. As the sun began to set and they packed up to ride back to the ranch, Caleb helped Eliza mount the horse, his hand steady on her waist. Before releasing her, he looked up and said, "Thank you for giving me a chance. I won't waste it." "Thank you for seeing me," Eliza replied. really seeing me, not just my circumstances or my mistakes or my desperate need. Thank you for seeing the person I'm trying to be. The ride back was quiet, comfortable, with Hope dozing against Eliza's chest and Caleb's solid warmth at her back. When they reached the ranch, several of the hands were gathered near the barn, and Pete gave them a knowing smile that made Eliza blush. That night, alone in her room with Hope sleeping peacefully beside her, Eliza allowed herself to imagine a future she'd thought was lost forever. A future with a husband who respected her, a daughter who would grow up loved and chosen, a home built on partnership instead of obligation. It wasn't the future she'd planned. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd dreamed of as a girl in her father's house, all propriety and perfect manners and society's approval. It was something better, something real. 3 days later, a visitor arrived at the Turner Ranch that shattered the peaceful progress of Eliza's new life. She was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough while Hope napped in her crate, when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Through the window, she saw a vehicle she recognized instantly, her father's delivery wagon, the one with Samuel Monroe painted on the side. Her hands stilled in the dough, her heart beginning to pound. Pete appeared in the doorway. "Miss Eliza, you got a visitor. Says he's your father." Eliza wiped her hands on her apron with shaking fingers. "Where's Caleb?" "Out in the north pasture. Won't be back for hours." Pete's expression was concerned. "You want me to send the man away?" Everything in Eliza wanted to say yes, but she'd spent a month running from her past and she was tired of running. "No," she said, lifting her chin. "I'll see him." Samuel Monroe stood in the ranch yard, looking older and harder than Eliza remembered. His eyes scanned the property with the critical assessment of a man used to evaluating worth in dollars and cents, and when they landed on Eliza emerging from the house, they held no warmth. "Father," Eliza said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Eliza." Samuel's tone was formal, distant. "I've come to talk some sense into you. If you've come to take me back, the answer is no." "I'm not here to take you back." Samuel's lip curled. "I'm here to offer you a way to salvage what's left of your reputation. Mrs. Henderson told me about Turner's announcement, about this supposed engagement." "It's not supposed," Eliza said. "It's real." "Don't be naive." Samuel stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Men like Caleb Turner don't marry disgraced women out of love. He's using you, Eliza. Using you for labor, for convenience, probably for other things I won't mention in polite company. And when he's tired of you, he'll cast you aside just like I did." The words were designed to hurt, and they did. But Eliza had learned something in the past month about pain. It could break you, or it could make you stronger. "You're wrong about him," she said quietly. "Caleb is nothing like you." Samuel's face darkened. "I'm your father. I'm trying to protect you from making an even bigger mistake." "You're my father in name only," Eliza shot back, finding her courage. A real father wouldn't have thrown out his daughter for showing mercy. A real father would have helped me save that baby instead of demanding I let her die. A real father would choose love over pride. That baby. Her name is Hope, Eliza interrupted, and she's mine now, my daughter, in every way that matters. "You can't just claim a child that isn't yours." "Why not?" Eliza's voice rose. "You disowned a child who was yours. If you can unmake family with a word, why can't I make it the same way?" Samuel Monroe stared at his daughter, and for the first time Eliza saw something flicker in his eyes that might have been doubt or regret, but it was gone before she could name it. "Come back to Silverbrook," he said, and his voice was almost pleading. "Without the baby. We can say you were ill, that you needed time to recover. We can rebuild your reputation, find you a proper husband." "No!" Eliza's voice was firm. "I'm not leaving Hope. I'm not leaving Caleb. And I'm not coming back to a town that values propriety over compassion." "Then you're a fool," Samuel spat. "And when Turner casts you aside, don't come crying to me." "I won't," Eliza said. "Because he won't. But even if he did, even if I ended up alone and penniless again, I'd still have my dignity. I'd still have the knowledge that I chose love over fear, mercy over judgment. Can you say the same?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Samuel Monroe opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and climbed back into his wagon without another word. Eliza watched him drive away, watched him disappear down the road toward Silverbrook, and felt the last chains of her old life finally break and fall away. She was free, truly free. When Caleb returned that evening and heard about the visit from Pete, he found Eliza in the garden, Hope on a blanket beside her while she pulled weeds with furious energy. "Pete told me your father was here," he said quietly. He was. Eliza didn't stop working. He offered to take me back if I abandoned Hope. And I told him no. Eliza finally looked up, and her eyes were fierce. "I chose Hope. I chose this life. I chose you." Caleb knelt beside her, taking her dirt-stained hands in his. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Eliza's voice was steady, certain, free of doubt for the first time since this whole thing began. "Not because I'm dependent on you or grateful to you, but because I want this. I want us. I want to build a family with you, to see where this courtship leads, to take the chance you offered me." "Even knowing it won't be easy?" Caleb asked. "Even knowing some people will always judge you, will always whisper that you trapped me or that hope isn't legitimate?" "Even knowing all of that?" Eliza smiled, and it was real and radiant. "Because the opinion of people who value judgment over mercy doesn't matter to me anymore. What matters is building something real with someone who sees me, all of me, and chooses me anyway." Caleb pulled her into his arms, and Eliza let herself be held, let herself feel safe and chosen and valued in a way she'd never felt before. On the blanket beside them, Hope gurgled happily, reaching for the sunlight filtering through the garden plants, completely unaware that her future had just been secured by two people choosing each other, choosing her, choosing to build a family out of compassion instead of obligation. The mountains stood silent in the distance, eternal witnesses to human courage and human choice. And in their shadow, a new family took root and prepared to grow. The weeks following Samuel Monroe's visit brought a subtle shift to life at the Turner Ranch. Eliza had expected to feel relief after turning her father away, but instead she found herself grappling with an unexpected grief. She mourned not the relationship she'd lost, that had been cold and conditional long before she'd left Silverbrook, but the relationship she'd never had. The father who might have chosen love over pride, compassion over reputation, his daughter over the opinions of strangers. Caleb noticed, of course. He'd become remarkably attuned to her moods in the months since their picnic, learning to read the subtle shifts in her expression, the small tells that revealed when she was troubled. "You're thinking about him again," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, Hope asleep in Eliza's arms. The ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, and the Montana sky was ablaze with sunset colors that seemed almost too vivid to be real. "Is it that obvious?" Eliza asked. "Only to someone who's paying attention." Caleb rocked slowly in his chair, his eyes on the horizon. "You want to talk about it?" Eliza was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. One of the things she'd come to value most about Caleb was his patience. He never pushed, never demanded, just offered space for her to work through her feelings at her own pace. "I thought I'd be angry," she said finally. "Or relieved. But mostly I just feel sad. Sad that he couldn't see past his own pride to the daughter standing right in front of him. Sad that he'd rather lose me completely than accept that I made a different choice than the one he wanted." "Some people can't separate love from control," Caleb said quietly. "They think if they're not dictating every decision, they're not fulfilling their role. My father was like that for a while after my mother died. Tried to manage every aspect of our lives because he thought that's what keeping us safe meant. It took my oldest sister running off to Denver before he realized he was pushing us away instead of protecting us." "What changed?" "She came back," Caleb said with a small smile. "Showed up 6 months later with a husband we'd never met and told my father he could either accept her choice or lose her forever. He chose acceptance. Wasn't easy for him. And he still struggles with not trying to control everything, but he learned that sometimes love means letting go." "Do you think my father will ever learn that?" Eliza asked, though she already knew the answer. "I don't know," Caleb said honestly. "Some people do, some don't. But here's what I do know. You can't wait for him to change before you allow yourself to move forward. You can't put your happiness on hold hoping he'll come around." "I'm not," Eliza protested, then paused. "Am I?" Caleb reached over and took her free hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. I think part of you is still waiting for permission that you don't need and won't get. Permission to be happy, to build a new life, to let yourself love and be loved without guilt. The word struck something deep inside Eliza's chest. "You're right," she whispered. "I've been so focused on proving I made the right choice that I haven't actually let myself enjoy the life I chose." "So start enjoying it," Caleb said simply. "Start believing that you deserve good things, not because you've suffered enough to earn them, but because you're a good person who made a brave choice and deserves happiness." Eliza looked down at Hope, whose face was peaceful in sleep, then up at Caleb, whose expression was open and honest and full of a quiet affection that made her heart ache in the best possible way. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said, the words escaping before she could think better of them. Caleb's hand tightened on hers. "You think?" "I know," Eliza corrected, finding her courage. "I know I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me, but it also feels right in a way nothing else has in a very long time." "Can I tell you something?" Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "I stopped falling weeks ago. I'm already there, Eliza. Completely, utterly in love with you, and this little girl, and the life we're building together." Eliza felt tears stream down her face, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that washed away old pain and made room for new joy. "Then I think we should set a date." "A date?" Caleb's eyes widened. "For the wedding." Eliza smiled through her tears. "Unless you've changed your mind about wanting to marry me?" "Not a chance." Caleb stood and pulled her gently to her feet, careful of Hope sleeping between them. "I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd have me." "Let's give it a month," Eliza said. "Give people time to get used to the idea. Give us time to plan something small but meaningful. And give me time to make a proper dress." "A month," Caleb agreed, "though I'd wait a year if that's what you needed." "A month is perfect." Eliza leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet, a promise of the future they were choosing together. The next 4 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and growing anticipation. Word spread quickly through the territory that Caleb Turner and Eliza Monroe were actually going through with the wedding, and the response was mixed but ultimately favorable. The neighboring ranchers, who'd seen Eliza's work ethic and character firsthand, were supportive. Their wives, won over by her cooking at various gatherings and her obvious devotion to Hope, began including her in their social circles. Even some of the people from Silverbrook who'd initially shunned her began to soften, recognizing that perhaps they'd been too quick to judge. But not everyone approved. Mrs. Henderson continued her campaign of disapproval, and a handful of the more rigidly proper families made it clear they wanted nothing to do with a woman who'd disgraced herself. Eliza learned to hold her head high and ignore the whispers, learned to value the opinions of people who actually knew her over those who only knew rumors. Hope was thriving, growing stronger and more alert every day. At 3 months old, she'd begun smiling regularly, her face lighting up whenever Eliza or Caleb came into view. The ranch hands had taken to calling her Little Hope and competed for her attention, hardened cowboys turning to mush at the sight of her toothless grins. Pete, in particular, had become a devoted guardian. "She reminds me of my youngest," he told Eliza one afternoon while watching Hope play with her toes. "Same spirit, same determination. That little girl's going to be something special." "She already is," Eliza had replied, her heart full. The wedding dress came together slowly, sewn in stolen hours between cooking and cleaning and caring for Hope. It wasn't fancy. Eliza had neither the money nor the desire for elaborate lace and beading, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. Soft ivory cotton with a fitted bodice and full skirt, embroidered at the hem with a delicate pattern of wildflowers that one of the neighbor women had taught her. "You look beautiful," Caleb told her 3 days before the wedding, catching a glimpse of her trying on the nearly finished dress. "Hope's a lucky girl to have such a lovely mother." "Hope's the one who brought us together," Eliza said, adjusting the waist seam. "I like to think she knew what she was doing from the start." "A matchmaking infant," Caleb teased. "That's a new one." They decided to hold the wedding at the ranch, with Pastor Williams officiating despite his initial discomfort with the circumstances. Caleb had made it clear that the pastor could either perform the ceremony or explain to his congregation why he'd refused to bless a union built on compassion and mutual respect. The pastor had chosen the former. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and golden, the kind of perfect autumn day that Montana specialized in. Eliza woke early, her stomach a tangle of nerves and excitement, and found Hope already awake, cooing softly in her crate. "Good morning, sweet girl," Eliza whispered, lifting the baby into her arms. "Today's a big day. Today you're getting a father who's going to love you and protect you and teach you to ride horses and probably spoil you terribly." Hope responded by grabbing a handful of Eliza's hair and pulling enthusiastically. "I'll take that as approval," Eliza laughed. The ceremony was set for mid-afternoon, giving Eliza time to prepare breakfast for the hands, put the finishing touches on the wedding meal, and get herself and Hope ready. Several of the neighbor women arrived early to help, bustling around the kitchen with casseroles and pies, offering advice and encouragement in equal measure. "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were perfect for Caleb," Mrs. Patterson from the neighboring Double Creek Ranch told Eliza as she helped her into the wedding dress. "He needed someone with backbone, someone who wouldn't just go along with whatever he said. My Harold's the same way. They're better men when they have strong women beside them." "I don't know about strong," Eliza demurred, struggling with the tiny buttons at her wrist. "Nonsense. You walked away from everything you knew to save a baby's life, then survived alone for weeks with nothing but determination and grit. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." Mrs. Patterson finished the last button and stepped back. "There. Absolutely lovely." Eliza looked at herself in the small mirror above her dresser and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy, healthy, hopeful. So different from the gaunt, terrified girl who'd stumbled into this ranch 2 months ago. "Thank you," she told Mrs. Patterson, "for everything, for being kind when others weren't, for giving me a chance." "Oh, honey, you earned every bit of kindness you got." Mrs. Patterson's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Now let's get you married before that groom of yours wears a hole in the porch from pacing." The ceremony took place in the garden behind the main house, where Eliza had spent so many hours pulling weeds and planning for a future she'd barely dared to hope for. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows, and the turnout was better than Eliza had expected. At least 30 people, including most of the ranch hands, several neighboring families, and even a few faces from Silverbrook who'd apparently decided that supporting the wedding was worth risking Mrs. Henderson's disapproval. Caleb stood at the front with Pastor Williams, wearing his best suit and looking nervous and happy, and so handsome that Eliza's breath caught in her throat. When he saw her walking toward him, Hope in her arms because there was no one else she'd trust to hold the baby during the ceremony, his expression transformed into something that made Eliza's eyes fill with tears, pure, unguarded love. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Pastor Williams spoke about the nature of family, about how it's built not just on blood but on choice and commitment and daily acts of love. He talked about the courage it takes to build something new from broken pieces, about the strength required to choose compassion over convenience. When it came time for the vows, Caleb took Eliza's free hand, the one not supporting Hope, and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Eliza, I promise to honor you, respect you, and stand beside you in whatever comes. I promise to be a father to Hope in every way that matters, to love her as my own, to protect her and guide her and give her every opportunity to become the remarkable woman I know she'll be. I promise to build a home with you founded on honesty and partnership, where we make decisions together and face challenges as a team. I promise to see you, really see you, for the rest of my life." Eliza was crying now, but she managed to speak her own vows through the tears. "Caleb, I promise to be your partner, your equal, your companion in building the life we've dreamed of. I promise to work beside you, to support you, to challenge you when you need challenging and comfort you when you need comfort. I promise to trust you with Hope's future, to welcome you as her father, to build a family with you based on choice and love instead of obligation. I promise to let myself be happy, to stop waiting for permission I don't need, and to believe that we deserve the good things we're creating together." "By the power vested in me," Pastor Williams said, his voice warm with approval, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle and brief, appropriate for the audience watching, but it held the promise of deeper affection to come. When they broke apart, Hope, who'd been remarkably patient through the entire ceremony, let out a loud, delighted squeal that made everyone laugh. I think she approves, Caleb said, grinning. She better, Eliza replied. This was all her idea. The celebration that followed was joyous and sincere. The wedding meal was abundant, the conversation lively, and the atmosphere warm with genuine happiness for the new family. Pete made a toast that had everyone laughing and several people crying, thanking Eliza for bringing life back to the Turner Ranch and Caleb for having the sense to recognize a good thing when he saw it. As the sun began to set and the guests started to depart, each one stopped to offer congratulations and well wishes. Even some of the people who'd been skeptical at first seemed genuinely moved by what they'd witnessed. Not a marriage of convenience or desperation, but a real partnership built on mutual respect and growing love. The last guest to leave was the biggest surprise. Just as Eliza was clearing the final dishes, a wagon pulled up and James Monroe climbed down. Eliza froze, her heart in her throat. Her brother was 16 now, nearly a man, but his face still held the softness of youth. He looked nervous and determined in equal measure. "James," she breathed, "what are you doing here?" "I had to come," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I had to see you to tell you." He stopped, swallowed hard, then continued. "Father was wrong. What he did to you was wrong, and I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. Sorry I let him send you away without fighting for you." Eliza set down the dishes and walked toward her brother, tears streaming down her face. "You were just a boy. It wasn't your responsibility to fight my battles." "Maybe not, but I should have tried." James pulled something from his coat pocket, a small wooden box. "This was Mother's. Father won't miss it, and I thought you should have it for your daughter." Eliza opened the box with shaking hands. Inside was their mother's cameo brooch, the one she'd worn every Sunday, the one Eliza had loved as a child. "James," she whispered, "I can't take this. If Father finds out—" "Let him find out." James's voice was fierce now, reminding Eliza of herself. "I'm not going to be like him, Lizzie. I'm not going to value reputation over people or pride over family. When I have a family of my own, someday I'm going to choose them. Every time. The way you chose Hope." Eliza pulled her brother into a fierce hug, and for a long moment they just held each other, bridging the gap that Samuel Monroe had tried to create between them. "Does Thomas know you're here?" Eliza asked when they finally pulled apart. "He wanted to come, but he's too young. Father watches him too closely." James wiped his eyes roughly. "But he sends his love. And he made me promise to tell you that he misses you, and he thinks Hope is lucky to have you as a mother." "Tell him I miss him too," Eliza said. "And tell him that when he's older, when he can make his own choices, he'll always have a place here with us." "I will." James looked past her to where Caleb stood on the porch with Hope, giving them privacy but staying close enough to offer support if needed. "Is he good to you?" "Better than good," Eliza said. "He's kind and honest, and he sees me as a partner, not a possession. He's everything Father isn't." James nodded, satisfied. "Then I'm glad for you, Lizzie. Truly glad." He climbed back into the wagon, then paused. "I'll visit when I can. Secretly, probably, but I'll find ways. You're my sister, and I'm not losing you just because Father's a stubborn fool." Eliza watched her brother drive away, the cameo clutched in her hand, and felt another piece of her past settle into place. Not forgotten, not erased, but integrated into the new life she was building. Caleb came down from the porch and wrapped his arms around her from behind, Hope nestled between them. "You all right?" "Better than all right," Eliza said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I have you, I have Hope, and I haven't completely lost my brothers. That's more than I ever dared hope for 2 months ago." "We should go inside," Caleb said softly. "Put Hope to bed. Start our first night as a family." Their first night as husband and wife was gentle and unhurried, a natural extension of the partnership they'd been building for weeks. After putting Hope down in the new crib Caleb had built, larger than the wooden crate, with careful attention to every detail, they lay together in Caleb's bed, now their bed, and talked until the stars wheeled overhead. "What do you want for our future?" Caleb asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Eliza's arm. "Really want, not what you think you should want." Eliza thought about it, allowing herself to dream without the weight of fear or limitation. I want Hope to grow up knowing she's loved unconditionally. I want more children, if we're blessed with them. A house full of laughter and chaos and love. I want to build something lasting here, something that reflects our values. And I want to always remember what it felt like to have nothing, so we never take for granted what we have. That sounds perfect, Caleb said. Though I should warn you, Pete's already planning to teach Hope to ride the minute she can walk, and the men are taking bets on whose daughter she'll be, gentle like you or stubborn like me. She can be both, Eliza said, smiling. The best parts of both of us, plus all her own unique qualities we haven't discovered yet. I can't wait to see who she becomes, Caleb said softly. Can't wait to see our family grow, to watch our children run through these fields, to grow old with you and look back on a life well lived. Eliza turned in his arms to face him, her heart so full it ached. Thank you for choosing us, for seeing past the scandal and the judgment to the real people underneath, for giving Hope a father and me a partner and both of us a future worth fighting for. Thank you for letting me, Caleb replied, kissing her forehead, for taking the risk, for trusting me, for building this with me. You're the bravest person I've ever known, Eliza Turner. Eliza Turner. The name still felt strange and new and wonderful. She was no longer Eliza Monroe, daughter of Samuel, defined by her father's approval or disapproval. She was Eliza Turner, wife of Caleb, mother to Hope, a woman who'd chosen her own path and built her own family from the rubble of rejection. The months and years that followed were full of the ordinary miracles that make up a life well lived. Hope took her first steps at 11 months, wobbling across the kitchen floor into Caleb's waiting arms while Eliza applauded and cried happy tears. She spoke her first word at 13 months, Papa, and Caleb had to excuse himself to the barn because his eyes were suspiciously wet. True to Pete's prediction, Hope learned to ride almost before she could run, sitting in front of Caleb on his big bay gelding and shrieking with delight. She had Eliza's dark hair and Caleb's blue eyes, a genetic coincidence that made people assume she was his by blood, and a personality all her own, fierce and loving, stubborn and sweet, brave enough to try anything and wise enough to ask for help when she needed it. When Hope was 2, Eliza gave birth to a son they named Samuel James. Samuel for the grandfather who'd rejected them, but whom Eliza had found a way to forgive. James for the brother who'd chosen love over fear. The baby was colicky and demanding, keeping them up for months, but Caleb walked the floors with him just as readily as Eliza did, never once suggesting that infant care was solely her responsibility. Hope adored her baby brother from the first moment, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. "My baby," she'd announce proudly to anyone who would listen, and Eliza and Caleb would exchange amused glances over her head. 2 years after Samuel came Lily, then 3 years after that came twin boys Marcus and Matthew. The Turner house became exactly what Eliza had dreamed of, full of laughter and noise and the organized chaos of a large, loving family. The ranch prospered under Caleb's management and Eliza's careful household economy. They added more land, hired more hands, built a larger house to accommodate their growing family. But they never forgot what it felt like to have nothing, and they never forgot the kindness that had saved them when they needed it most. When families fell on hard times, the Turner Ranch was there with work and fair wages. When women found themselves in impossible situations, Eliza offered help without judgment. When children needed homes, the Turners opened their doors. Over the years, they took in 3 more orphans, giving them the same choice and love they'd given Hope. You're building an empire of cast-offs, Pete teased Eliza one afternoon, watching their ever-expanding brood play in the yard. "I'm building a family," Eliza corrected, bouncing baby Marcus on her hip while keeping an eye on the older children. "That's all. Just a family." But it was more than just a family. It was a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, compassion over judgment, mercy over pride. It was proof that the worst moments of your life could become the foundation for something beautiful if you had the courage to rebuild. Samuel Monroe never reconciled with his daughter, but James visited regularly once he came of age and eventually brought his own wife and children to meet their Aunt Eliza. Thomas followed suit a few years later, defying their father's wishes to maintain a relationship with his sister. Samuel died alone and bitter, having chosen pride over the possibility of redemption, and Eliza mourned not the man he was, but the father he might have been. Mrs. Henderson continued her campaign of disapproval until her death, but her opinion had long since ceased to matter to anyone who actually knew the Turners. The other families in the territory saw the truth that Eliza and Caleb had built something rare and precious, a marriage based on genuine partnership and mutual respect, a family forged by choice rather than obligation. On Hope's 18th birthday, Eliza sat her down for a conversation they'd been building toward for years. Hope was a young woman now, beautiful and confident and strong, preparing to head to Denver for teachers' college despite several suitors already vying for her attention. "I need to tell you something," Eliza said, her heart pounding. "Something about where you came from." Hope smiled gently. "Mama, I've known for years that Papa isn't my father by blood. It's not exactly a secret when you look nothing like your siblings." Eliza's breath caught. "You knew? Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it doesn't matter." Hope took her mother's hands. "Blood doesn't make a family, Mama. Love does. Choice does. Papa chose to be my father from the moment you married him, and he's never once treated me as anything less than his beloved daughter. That's what matters." "Your birth mother," Eliza continued, needing Hope to know the full story, "died saving you. She used her last strength to get you to safety, to give you a chance at life. I don't know who she was or where she came from, but I know she loved you enough to make sure you survived." "And you loved me enough to sacrifice everything to keep me alive," Hope said softly. "Two mothers who chose me, who fought for me. I'm the luckiest girl in the world." Eliza pulled her daughter, her first daughter, her brave, beautiful Hope, into a fierce embrace and felt the last piece of her past finally heal. The choice she'd made that rainy April morning had cost her everything she'd known, but it had given her everything that mattered. Years later, when Eliza was gray-haired and watching her grandchildren play in the same yard where her own children had played, Caleb sat beside her on the porch and took her hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Choosing Hope that day, walking away from everything you knew?" Eliza looked out at the sprawling ranch, at the house full of love and laughter, at the family they'd built from broken pieces and brave choices. She thought about the woman she'd been, young and scared and desperate, and the woman she'd become, strong and confident and surrounded by love. "Not for a single moment," she said. "That was the day my real life began, the day I learned that the family you choose is just as powerful as the family you're born into. Maybe more so." "She was cast out for nursing a stranger's child," Caleb quoted softly, a wry smile on his weathered face. "But the cowboy said, 'That's exactly the kind of woman I want.'" "Did the cowboy know what he was getting into?" Eliza teased. "Not even a little bit," Caleb admitted, pulling her close. "But he'd do it all again in a heartbeat." They sat together as the sun set over the Montana mountains, two people who'd found each other in the darkest moments of their lives and built something luminous from the ashes of rejection and judgment. Behind them, through the open windows of the house, they could hear their family, children and grandchildren, the chosen and the born, all woven together into a tapestry of love that would endure long after they were gone. Eliza Monroe Turner had been cast out for showing mercy to a dying woman and her child. She'd been judged, condemned, and exiled for choosing compassion over obedience. But in that single act of defiance, she'd found her true family. She'd discovered her real strength. She'd built a legacy that would echo through generations, not of shame and scandal, but of courage and choice and the transformative power of unconditional love. And that, she thought, as Caleb's arm tightened around her shoulders and Hope's laughter drifted from the kitchen where she was helping with dinner, was worth every hardship, every judgment, every moment of fear and uncertainty. Because family, real family, isn't about blood or propriety or society's approval. It's about the people who choose you when they don't have to. It's about the love you build with intention and protect with everything you have. It's about looking at a helpless infant and saying, "I will fight for you, even when it costs you everything." It's about a cowboy who sees a woman nursing a stranger's child and thinks not disgrace, but exactly the kind of woman I want. And it's about two people and a baby building something beautiful from nothing, proving that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose for ourselves. The Turner Ranch stood solid against the Montana sky, a testament to courage, and compassion, to love, chosen over fear, to the remarkable truth that sometimes being cast out is the first step toward being truly found. And in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the family she'd built from broken pieces and brave choices, Eliza Turner smiled and knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. Every single one.